What's going on? It's the RapNerd, and I'm here today to talk about my top 10 vampire films. And as a disclaimer, I'm talking about my favorite. I don't use the word best because art is all subjective, and I'm not here to say what's better or what's not. These are just movies that I personally love and get enjoyment out of, and I also consider to be good. So I had to start there. Now, I put a list out back in 2022, and since then we have gotten some really good vampire movies, some of which made it into my top 10, and I feel like now is the perfect time to revisit that list and put some updates out there, and also, keep some that still remain around. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it, man. So for a few honorable mentions before we get into the top 10, I have to shout out Abigail, that released last year. I absolutely love that movie. I have seen it numerous times since it dropped, and it definitely is in my category of favorites, just did not make my top 10. I also liked Voyage of the Demeter, which I thought was a really good retelling of Dracula coming to London. Movie is effective all the way around, and I had a review out for it when it initially released, and I was a bit harsh on it when I did that, and looking back on it now and also rewatching it since that review, I feel a bit different than what I was saying in there. Yes, it is the retelling of a story, but I still think that it's effectively done, especially with this type of creature design. So this movie is also in my favorites. Another one is Underworld. I really like that action vampire film. It kind of is like the Matrix and vampirism and Lycanism, that if you will, in one, and it's a great action horror flick. And the last two are the Fright Night remake and Daybreakers. So let's get on to the top 10. So at the number 10 spot is Stakeland and Stakeland 2. Yes, those are two movies, but I feel like it's one really big story. And the thing I like about these films are their take on the thought of vampires. This takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, and they kind of go about it like it's an infection that took over the world and caused a plague and killed a lot of people out. Even the way the vampires are depicted, they're more along the lines of zombies or the undead, and it just makes for a very unsettling watch because of how ravenous they are. These aren't the typical vampires that are in full control, who have a little bit of sexy, who are evil and they want to be. These are just like creatures that's just itching to kill, and for that reason it intrigued me when I watched it. The first movie is this group of characters trying to travel to a new town. I believe they're trying to go to Canada because the vampires haven't effectively gotten into Canada, so they're traveling from some state, I forgot where it was at, to get there. This is like a journey story, and I love the journey story. And then the second movie is when they actually get there and what happens. So it makes for a really great double feature, and to me they're one big movie, so I put both of them at the number 10 spot. So at the number 9 and 8 spot, I'm going to combine both of these movies because they're kind of interchangeable and they're here for a reason, and that is Fright Night and The Lost Boys. To me, these films are the staple and blueprint of campy vampires in modern day. I gotta add that. I feel like whenever we see any type of modern day campy vampire movie, it's all a branch off of these two movies. And both of them provide the glue to build what we know vampires today as in a campy format. I don't think anyone would debate me on that one. And I really like the humanoid vampire design that they both crafted, which still can be seen in today's vampire designs that go for this type of look. Not to mention there's a fusion of coming of age with both films as well that also usually fits into the category of the campy vampire film. So without a doubt, I have to have both of these on the list. So at number 9 and 8 are Fright Night and The Lost Boys. At the number 7 spot is From Dusk Till Dawn. And I believe that this movie takes what those two films that I just mentioned and expounds upon them in an even more modern way. I love how this is pretty much two wholly different movies slapped in one. I remember the first time I watched it, it was on a Sci-Fi channel, and something just made me want to watch it. I was intrigued by the crime story at the beginning having to do with the Greco brothers. And I was like, oh, well, where's this leading at? You know what I mean? And then boom, you go to Mexico and it just turns into a vampire onslaught. And I think that this film, despite the weirdness going on with Quentin Tarantino's character, if you know what I mean, you know what I mean. This movie's just a blast and equal parts gruesome and violent at the same time. on both ends, because again, at the beginning of the movie you start with these criminals on a run, and I never forget that gas station scene. Really sat with me because of how realistic the violence felt to me when I watched it, and it still holds up to this day when I watch it. And then as you tumble into the whole vampire story, you learn things with the characters, you learn the lore, you learn what works and what doesn't, and the vampire design in this film is extremely gruesome, and shout out to the makeup effects department, especially when you have Tom Savini, who is actually part of the cast, who does incredible making work. And my favorite part of the film is that final frame that just takes your mind places. Yet again, a first memory of mine seeing that made me sit back in my chair and think, like, what does that represent? You know, as a kid who is learning his way around cinema. And Robert Rodriguez directed this. He's one of my favorite directors of all time. I just love how much of a man of the trade in film he is. He writes, directs, DOPs, all kind of stuff, and you can see his film style dripping all through this film. So at number 7 is From Dusk Till Dawn. At the number 6 spot is Nosferatu, the 2024 release directed by Robert Eggers, and this movie's a masterpiece. I've got a review up that you can watch right now that I go into detail as to why I love this movie, but I've always been obsessed with the Nosferatu designed vampire and wanted somebody to do a big budget remake of it, and Robert delivered. I don't think there's nobody better who could have done this film. This movie is creepy, romantically dark, shot beautifully, acted and performed to the top tier of what films can be performed at. And most of all, it's scary. I mean, Orlok's voice in here made my skin quiver when Nick Holt's character first goes to his castle and he's talking. Like, I remember just hearing it and I got goosebumps. And I even love the lore of vampires that it plays on here with Orlok's ability to control and manipulate. And the movie kind of just feels like a fever dream that you kind of don't understand in parts because of what Orlok is able to do. And I also love that there's this balance of hiding him in the shadows, but you see him when you need to. So it doesn't really ruin the scare by being able to see him in totality until it's the time that you need to see him. So all in all, this movie is shooting off at all cylinders, and it's one that's going to join my winter movie watches. And they were able to recapture that 1920 style in today's format perfectly. So at the number 6 spot is Nosferatu. At number 5 is Let Me In, the remake directed by Matt Reeves. And again, incredible direction. I think that this is a masterful film. The cinematography is beautifully dark. I absolutely love the color, the texture, the framing, and I just love how it focuses on the idea of the vampire lore, that you really have to let them in, and they even go out of their way to show you what happens if you don't let the vampire in, which I feel like is a very interesting choice, because before this movie, I've always heard that, but I never really understood what would happen, or the idea of, like, can a vampire walk in without being invited? And it's like some invisible mime type wall where they just get stuck. But this film answers that, and I automatically think of this movie every time I see vampire movies, you know, in case somebody wants to walk in. I like that it's a slow burn because you really get to sit with all of the characters who get screen time. And it's really just a tragic love story that reveals itself as the movie goes on, because the way it starts, I was kind of in a space of like cluelessness as to, like, what's going on with this little vampire and this guy. But then once it hits, it's like, oh, so this is like actually kind of fucked up in a lot of ways, which is what I would expect from vampires. So absolutely love this film. So at the number 5 spot for me is Let Me In. So at number 4 is Salem's Lot, the 1979 miniseries, or what I like to call the 3-hour epic horror film. It is by far, for me, one of the scariest movies I've ever seen, like, in general. I think that the vampire design here is incredibly creepy. And just for this to take place back then, the things that they were able to pull off are amazing. I mean, the kid floating by the door asking to be let in is terrifying. What they do with the eyes, that color change, Jesus Christ, that is terrifying. There's plenty here to love. I mean, there's a lot of jump scares alongside the creepy atmosphere. The score is like overly orchestrated, but it adds this vibe of, like, you know something is going wrong. You know, the first half of the film really is just you in this town of Salem's Lot, seeing how regular people get down from a day-to-day basis, and then you have small instances of this vampire thing, which you don't even know is a vampire, that's creeping up in the background, this box being delivered, this weird dude who just moved into a house. You don't know what's going on until shit happens, and then when it happens, the domino blocks fall. And there are like some great jump scares in this movie. To be done in '79 and still hold up beautifully. I love the idea of this demonic vampire merging together with the town of Salem's light, and you see people do terrible things, and in comes this vampire. Like, I love the first jump scare when Dennis is caught sleeping with old dude's wife, and he gets ran out of the house, and while the husband is inside beating his wife, this dude comes out and runs straight into that hand, and you get a freeze frame. And I just think that that was so well done, and there are so many different scenes like that, especially when, I'm forgetting the main vampire's name, but when he pops up at that dinner table, oh my god, that is terrifying. So easily one of my favorite horror films, and at the 4th spot for my favorite vampire movies. Now at the number 3 spot, maybe a little recency bias, but I really don't think that it is, because this movie is spectacular, and that is Sinners. Now I've done 2 review videos on this, and you can watch those to see my deeper dive, but this movie is just amazing. It was able to do something that no horror movie has ever been able to do, and that is be such a cultural representation, get under my skin emotionally. I think that it's nightmarish. It's a horror through in and throughout. The score, the music is just as much of a character as anybody else. All of the characters are fleshed out. The performances work. It's bloody. It's drama filled. It has action. It's just one of the most perfect films that I've ever seen, and I literally have no reps about it. But again, you can watch both reviews to get more in detail thoughts about what I think, but easily one of my favorite vampire movies and movies ever from this point on. So at number 3 is Sinners. At the number 2 spot is my boy Blade. Now this film is kind of a cheat because it is more in the action than it is horror, but still, we're talking about vampires. You can't have a vampire movie that's not horror. And this movie just meant so much to me as a kid. I remember seeing it for the first time, like, yo, it's a black dude who's a vampire killing and slaying vampires, and this is him doing it for real. That set my mind on so many different places, and even inspired me to take some karate classes myself. So I'm forever in debt and grateful for this movie because of what it did to a young kid who was very influential from that standpoint. And the movie's just cool, bro. Like the perfect late 90s vibe, the opening iconic blood rave scene that still holds up to this day. There are some CGI things that have aged poorly, but still just a fantastic movie. It's just oozing atmosphere, swagger. Granted, I know that Blade is a bit different in the comic books. He's, a Brit, but it doesn't even matter. Wesley Snipes mastered it so well that all of the iterations of Blade have followed his version, which I think is dope as hell, and it just says a lot about how much ground was covered in this film, and that's why it's at the number 2 spot on this list. Now, number 1 on this list is 30 Days of Night. I absolutely love this movie. This is another masterpiece that not only is directed well, acted well, but I find it to be the scariest iteration of vampires, period. When I first saw this movie, these fucking vampires terrified me to death. That design with these long finger-like claws, their eyes completely blacked out, and I even believe in post-production they altered the facial features of everybody to look like something that's familiar, but also something that's not really familiar, and the look of these things just creeped me out. If I saw that in real life, that would scare me more than anything. Like, how they landed on that design is crazy, but it is scary as hell. And I love the concept of vampires going to a town that they know is going to be completely dark for 30 days, and they use that to their advantage. Such a really, really unique concept for a story like this, and the fact that it's based off a graphic novel makes it even better, because these frames in this film look like paintings. Utterly gorgeous. I love how desaturated everything is. I love when the action kicks off, it's shot at a higher frame rate. Josh Hartnett being one of my favorite actors in this film as the lead, and he has this underlining issue with his, wife that going through divorce. So yet again, kind of like Salem's Lot, you're in this town of people just doing what they do, normally, and then here come these vampires to mess everything up. This movie never gets old. and has aged really, really well, and still think that it's the top of the food chain when it comes to vampire movies. So but the number one spot for me is 30 Days of Night. So those are my top 10 vampire movies. Let me know in the comments what are yours. And again, if this list does not coincide with what you think, this is no hate and no disrespect. It's just my list, and that's just how I feel about the films. And if you like this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you already are subscribed, thank you. Until next time, peace. RapNerd Productions, no capping, that's word to mommy. Instead of banking on it, now rapping is just a hobby.